Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, taking a deep dive into this USC defense heading into 2023. And you talk about some of the biggest storylines of the 2023 college football season. I think one of them is how good can this USC defense be? If you guys have been listening to us over the summer, extremely high on this USC program. I've even gone as far as saying this team can win a national title. And now we don't have many questions about the offense. That offense seems to be a lock to be one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the country. Now, the question for this team and a significant storyline for the college football landscape is how much better does this USC defense get? Because if they take some big strides, which we'll get into it, I think they can. This is a team that certainly can win not only the Pac-12. This is a team that can compete for a national title. It's rare you get to run it back with one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen at the college football level in Caleb Williams. This is a team that's special, and we're going to dive into the USC defense and kind of talk about, one, what went wrong last year, and then two, how does it get better in 2023? Now, before we do, just want to say thank you to the USC fans. It's been truly a blast talking USC recruiting, talking USC in the transfer portal. It's no secret the fellas are very high on this program heading into 2023. All the fight-ons in the comment section, all the input truly does mean a lot. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel as the season approaches. This is going to be a team that we're talking a lot about because, again, I think a bona fide contender for a national championship in 2023. Now, I want to get into what went wrong last year, and I think it was pretty clear. Like, the depth and talent just, quite frankly, wasn't there. Alex Grinch and Lincoln Riley tried to really retool this defense in the transfer portal. Now, they did the same thing on the offensive side of the ball. Well, it's a lot easier to retool the offense when you have a guy like Caleb Williams coming in. He's going to make that offense elite. Now, on the defense, talent and depth is much, much more important. You can't really rely on one guy to carry a defense like Caleb Williams kind of could for this offense. And I'm not saying Caleb Williams carried the offense entirely. There are some really good playmakers on that team, guys like Jordan Addison, guys like Mario Williams. That being said, the defense, it's much, much more important to have that depth and talent at all levels of the defense. And they just did not have that last year. That was probably the biggest concern, was just the lack of physicality and depth they had up front. You take a look at last year, allowing over 5 yards per carry to opposing running backs. They allowed a 64% completion percentage and 6.3 yards per play. That is one of the worst. And on top of that, on third downs, one of the worst in the country. So you're talking about a defense that struggled in a lot of those important metrics on defense. The only thing that was really saving this defense from, quite frankly, even looking worse was they were able to get a lot of turnovers. And that is a very important aspect, and you hope that continues for Alex Grinch in this USC defense. That being said, turnovers is not something you want to solely rely on for your defense being solid. Now, here's the fun part, is how does this USC defense take strides? Now, you hear so much in the national media say, oh, USC is not a bona fide national title contender because they still have a bad defense. Now, I get some people just don't follow the transfer portal. When it's the offseason, it's the offseason for them. They're not really following college football. Now, if you're sickos like us, you're refreshing Twitter every 5 minutes to check the transfer portal, you would know that USC has gotten significantly better on the defensive side of the ball, not only from a talent standpoint, but I think more importantly, a depth standpoint. And you take a look at this USC defense and who they're going to be trotting out in 2023, this defense is going to look vastly different. And you see all the yellow names on this depth chart are guys who weren't in the program last year. I mean, that is what, 6-7 guys potentially starting for USC that weren't even in the program last year. So going to get into some of the playmakers and some of the reasons why I think this USC defense can take massive steps in 2023. And I think it starts with the front seven, a completely retooled defensive line. And I want to go into the interior. You obviously lose a guy like Thule, who was kind of the lone bright spot of this USC defense. And there weren't really many good players. I mean, you could probably throw in Kalen Bullock in the back end, but really not many guys that played to their potential, played quality winning football on this defense. It shows in the statistics. That being said, Thule was one of those guys. You lose him. That being said, this defensive line, I think, has the potential to be one of the better units. I don't even know in the Pac-12, but in the country. It's completely retooled, and they have some massive names, not only from a talent standpoint, but you start looking at the 2 and 3 deep. They got guys that they can cycle in, and that is not something USC could say in 2022. And you saw that when they played some physical teams like Utah and they were losing the time of possession, they just kind of gotten ran down a little bit. And so this year, I don't think you'll see as much of that. And I want to focus on the inside first. Two legit studs, and there's a lot of talk about Bear Alexander. And I mean, we were excited about it. We talked a lot about it. That being said, I don't even know if he's the best interior defensive lineman on this team heading into 2023. That's no disrespect to a guy like Bear Alexander, who I think is a bona fide stud. But Kyan Barrs coming from Arizona, I don't know. I mean, again, I love it. I love USC football, really. So Kyan Barrs, I followed the strength coach. 32 reps of 225 in the offseason. This is a dude that is extremely strong, was extremely productive for Arizona. And I think the combination of Bear Alexander and Kyan Barrs is going to go a long way in fixing that rushing defense, right? We're not going to be allowing 5 yards per carry against opposing running backs because you have two guys who are legit studs. And you talk about the depth. I mean, a guy like Jack Sullivan coming in for Purdue, who was playing significant football in the Big Ten. He's a guy that I don't know if he starts because of how high I am on Kyan Barrs and Bear Alexander. But when those big dogs need a blow, which they do, you have to cycle out your defensive line. You take a look at why Georgia's defense has been so dominant. They go 2 to 3 deep of legit studs. And so when their guys get tired, they have their second deep coming in that are very, very quality players. And a lot of programs across the country don't have that benefit. USC certainly didn't have that benefit last year. I think they will in 2023. So having guys like Jack Sullivan, I've heard Sam Green's playing all over the defensive line as a true freshman. He could be another guy that you cycle in. There's a lot of dudes on this depth chart that you feel good about coming in after Kyan Barrs and Bear Alexander. Now, the pass rush is something that you need to step up as well. Thule was really outside of Thule, I think the next leading sack number, if I recall, check my notes here. Yeah, 5 sacks. So they just weren't really able to impact opposing quarterbacks. And that's something you're going to be needing to do, not only to win the Pac-12. You take a look at how good these quarterbacks are in the Pac-12. You're going to need to do that to win a national title. That's probably one of the most important metrics on the defensive side of the ball is how well can you get those negative plays, impact quarterbacks, create havoc, right? And that's like Kirby Smart's recipe. And Georgia football is kind of the recipe for dominant defense. Who is going to be stepping up in terms of creating some pressure, getting some negative plays, some sacks? You also have guys coming in the transfer portal who I think you're extremely excited about, but you also have guys like, don't forget, there are some studs on this team still. Now, starting off with the guys in the transfer portal, Anthony Lucas, from what I've read, and I've been reading a lot of spring practice notes, a lot of fall camp notes, Anthony Lucas coming over from Texas A&M looks like a dude. And so he's the guy that I have my eyes on the most. You're talking about a truly special talent, one of the most coveted recruits in that 2022 class. I think Jamil Muhammad from Georgia State is also a guy that can really provide some juice. And then one guy I want to talk about that I feel like just gets forgotten about because of all these new names in the transfer portal, and that's Corey Foreman. Two things about Corey Foreman. One, sure, many USC fans know how good he was out of high school, and he shows flashes. Like going back, watching some reps from USC's defense in 2022, Corey Foreman didn't play a ton, but when he did, you see that 5-star athleticism. I love Sean New as a defensive line coach. If there's anybody, I mean, as a Michigan fan, I know Sean Newell well. I know his development. He did a phenomenal job developing guys like Aiden Hutchinson, David Ajabo. If that can finally click for Corey Foreman going into year 3, and that's when you normally see it start to click, right? You're a true freshman. You don't get much burn. Sometimes you see it start to click as a second-year guy. But if the guy's a stud, like it starts to click year 3. If Corey Foreman can have it click, he's one of the keys, in my opinion, to this USC defense. And we have a couple guys that I'm going to talk about in terms of keys to this defense. Corey Foreman is one of them. Man, if he really does put it together, I'm extremely excited about what he can bring. Now, getting to the linebacker room, this is the room that I'm probably most excited for. I'm going to be and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but Shane Lee was just not good enough last year. And Eric Gentry was playing hurt. I mean, so Shane Lee, you probably don't see as much of him in 2023. And I don't mean to bag on him. I think he's one of the leaders in that locker room. But you talk about Mason Cobb coming in from Oklahoma State, one of the best linebackers we saw in the country last year. I think he might be one of the bigger storylines of this USC defense, a guy that can fill gaps. You talk about being a hammer in the run game, continuing to try to work on that run defense. Mason Cobb behind a much improved defensive line Very optimistic about that. And then Eric Gentry, another guy that I would, and me and USC fans and I kind of disagreed on this. I think Eric Gentry hasn't even scratched the surface. I don't even think he was okay last year. I don't think he was great. I think he's a guy that can be an absolute stud. You don't find many athletes with the size, the length, the speed that Eric Gentry has. And he's a little bit of a work in progress, probably needs to put on some weight. Looks like a defensive back out there sometimes, but he's a guy that if he can put it together, I think you feel really good. And now getting into that depth, now you feel much better about Shane Lee being kind of in that 2 deep as opposed to being a 3-down linebacker like he was for USC in 2022. And then another guy, if you guys know I love recruiting, I'm a little bit of a recruit nerd. One of my favorite recruits, and I believe Lincoln Riley's on record saying the number 1 linebacker on his board from that 2023 class, true freshman Tackett Curtis. And you talk about guys, we did a breakdown on Tackett Curtis, guys that are ready to go year one. Tackett Curtis is one of those dudes. I would expect to see Tackett Curtis play and play kind of a significant amount. And another guy that I just want to mention before we move to the secondary, we're going to talk about, where is he? Braylon Shelby. I don't know if they have him on this depth chart. Braylon Shelby coming in as a true freshman. I talk about guys who are physically ready. I don't know if you've seen pictures. He wasn't in for the spring. That dude looks ready. He could be a factor as well. Now, the secondary. This secondary was good at times and bad at times. I think on average, not great, right? I mean, a 64% completion percentage is quite frankly not good enough, especially when you're playing a conference where the quarterback play is as good as it is. So I'm looking at the secondary. How does this unit get better? They bring in some transfers, but a lot of this unit, I mean, they completely retooled the front seven, brought in a ton of defensive linemen. You bring in Mason Cobb. I think in the secondary, Alex Grinch, Lincoln Riley took a look at this depth chart and said, all right, I think I like the players that we have. They need to take a step. Now you bring in Christian Roland Wallace, who's played a ton of football for Arizona. I think that adds probably a starting cornerback, but if anything, a guy that you can trust back there. Now there are a couple guys that I want to talk about that could really take that step. And the first guy is Damani Jackson. As a Michigan fan, he was considering Michigan. I'm very familiar with Damani Jackson. He can be an absolute stud. You talk about a first-round NFL draft pick, the length, the size, the physicality, the long speed Damani Jackson has coming into year 2. Hopefully he stays healthy. If it clicks for him, I truly think he can be a premier cornerback in the Pac-12. And then in the secondary, I mean, in the back end, you have a guy like Kalen Bullock, who I think is legit one of the better safeties in the whole entire country, an absolute ball hawk. For USC's defense, especially in the secondary, I would like to see them continue to turn the ball over. I mean, a lot of tip balls, getting hands on footballs, but more importantly, on a down-to-down basis, this unit needs to be better because giving up almost a 65% completion percentage is just not going to cut it if you want to win a national title. Now, here's the last point I want to make is this USC defense, I think, unarguably gets better. And if it doesn't, Alex Grinch, see you later. If it doesn't get better by week 6, I think you might even make a move middle of the season. That being said, now the question is, how much better does this USC defense get? And how good does it need to be to win a national title? Now, I think this USC defense, from a talent standpoint, I'm looking at this depth chart, can be a top 50 defense. And that's probably all it needs to be. I'm not asking for this USC defense to go all the way from, I think they were like 98th in total defense to, I'm not asking them to go to like top 10, right? But I'm asking them to take some meaningful strides. You have the personnel. Last year, I understand. That's why I'm kind of giving Alex Grinch like a get out of jail free card. You just didn't have the players. You didn't have the depth chart. The cupboards were bare, and you really struggled to bring all these transfer portal guys together. Injury bugs happened. That being said, this is the year that you can't waste this year if you're USC. You have the best quarterback in the country, surrounded by arguably the best talent in the country. This offense is hard to see not being a top 5 offense, if not a top 1 offense in the country. This defense, I'm not saying needs to be a top 10 defense, but I am saying it needs to take strides, get into that top 50. And again, you talk about like time of possession. If this defense can get better against the run, if it can get some more 3 and outs and give Caleb Williams just a few more drives, let him touch the ball a little bit more, that's going to even improve the offense more. This defense struggled in a big way to get off the field. You look at that 103rd on third down. They could not get stops on third down. If they can improve that number, give Caleb Williams some more touches, this is the most dangerous team in the country. Because you look across the college football landscape. In the Pac-12, I think I don't mean to overlook the Pac-12 here. The Pac-12 is good. Washington, Oregon, Utah, even Oregon State. Like, this is a really quality conference, but I think USC has their eyes set on not just the Pac-12. I think they have their eyes set on a national championship. And you look at the teams you're going to have to beat for a national championship. Georgia has to replace a ton of talent, including their quarterback Stetson Bennett. Alabama replacing the number 1 draft pick in Bryce Young. Ohio State replacing the number 2 draft pick in CJ Stroud. You look across the country at the teams you're going to have to beat to win a national title. A lot of those top teams have some serious question marks. For USC, specifically at the quarterback position, you don't have any of those question marks. So the question mark is, can USC's defense be elite in 2023? Not even be elite, but just take some strides. I certainly think they can. I think the national media is in a big way selling this defense and this unit short. And if they take some strides, get into the top 50, look out, this USC team is poised to do something special in 2023. Again, Lincoln Riley, one of the best coaches in the country. I don't really care what anyone else has to say. There has been, I believe I saw a stat, Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban are the only 2 coaches that have played in more college football playoff games than Lincoln Riley. I mean, that just speaks to how quality and how consistent a coach Lincoln Riley has been. This is a team that's dangerous in 2023. I'm extremely excited to watch them. When we have that week 0 game for USC, we're going to be jumping on right after and kind of breaking down this defense. I don't care what the offense does in week 1 because they're going to put up points. They're going to put up 60. We know they're going to put up 60, maybe 50. I don't know. That being said, we're going to break down this defense because if you start seeing some meaningful improvements to this defense, this is going to be a fun season for the USC Trojans. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. And if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.